Welkom bij de Alopecia Coach podcast. Wat leuk dat je luistert. Ik ga Alison Mann in deze podcast interviewen. Zij is een licensed therapist en mental health coach. Je hoort het al, een Amerikaanse uit New York. En zij richt zich vooral op body image en alopecia. Alison heeft zelf al vanaf haar 4e jaar alopecia en is helemaal kaal. Ze heeft geen wimpers, geen wenkbrauwen, geen haar op haar hoofd. En wil ook geen haarwerken, geen wimpers en geen wenkbrauwen. Omdat zij zich het beste voelt, gewoon as she is. Daarmee inspireert ze duizenden en inmiddels wel miljoenen mannen, vrouwen en kinderen die met alopecia te maken hebben. En is zij een baken voor mensen die hun weg proberen te vinden in de alopecia space. Heel veel plezier. Als je meer over Alison wil weten, check dan vooral haar website aidbyally.com. Stuur me een berichtje als je met haar in contact wil komen.
Yeah, thank you for having me. As you mentioned, my name is Alison. I'm a therapist based in New York/New Jersey area. And yeah, I mainly specialize in things that are related to anxiety, body image, eating disorders, but I've also had alopecia since the age of 4, which is part of why I wanted to become a therapist and enter the mental health field. And that's why I started coaching as well, because I wanted to be able to help people with hair loss worldwide, because it's very hard to find mental health professionals that understand the experience of hair loss. So that is how I got into it all.
Yay. And that's why I'm so happy that you're on this podcast with me. Because when I started doing this as well, I've had alopecia since the age of 18. And I was I'm a psychologist as well and a coach, but I didn't have any mental support or emotional support when I got the diagnosis. And 20 years after, when I started thinking about changing my career, I was wondering, is there any more help? Has it progressed a little? Has it become better? But in Holland, it really hasn't, in my experience. And the women and the people I talk to in coaching as well, they're like, no, there's pretty much nothing there, What is it? What is the situation like on your end?
Kind of similar. It's hard. I mean, there's certainly, I would say when I was younger, and even still now, I still know some therapists in the space who wear wigs, but I wouldn't say they're necessarily people who don't specialize in helping people with hair loss. It's just they happen to be another therapist who have alopecia. I had a really hard time finding a therapist who looked like me, who presented right, who didn't wear wigs. And I think there's nothing wrong with wearing a wig. I think they're a great resource, and we have to figure out what feels most authentic to us. And part of the gap I saw was that I didn't see any examples of people who had the same authenticity that felt true to me. And I was like, there has to be other people who could feel the same way as me, who feel less authentic with the wig versus people who feel more authentic with the wig. And I was like, where do those people exist? And how can I find myself represented and also find someone who can represent that and also help in that way? So I would say it's similar. There's certainly people with alopecia who are therapists, but I had trouble finding people who were specializing in that or making it known that there was offerings for that. So I would say it's certainly increasing, but there's still not
lots of work to be done.
Right. And it's not something that you like go to the doctor and they offer like, hey, there's this resource or there's people that do this or can help you with this. That's not a thing, which I feel like is the worst part, because the first person they talk to is a dermatologist. And if they're not offering resources or saying that these things exist at that point, the diagnosis, they'll never know. So it's still a struggle. Yeah.
Did you end up finding someone that worked for you?
No. It's actually interesting. So I grew up with close family friends who were therapists, and one of them actually had alopecia.
Yeah, really?
Yeah. Wow. But she doesn't necessarily specialize in working with people with hair loss. I would say she doesn't maybe she has a few people, but not because she marks herself in that way. It just sort of happened. But she's also someone who wears a wig. So even within that, I still did not know a therapist who showed up bald. But seeing her almost like gave this thing to me, and through knowing her, and she also lost her hair when she was much older. And so just knowing that was a path for me and that there was almost a gap there. And I think she kind of agreed to that. Like, there is not like specifically therapists you can seek out who will help you with this. Because even her, that's not something that she necessarily did. But in that way, I knew, there was a I keep saying gap, but that's exactly what it was. I was like, there's definitely a need there for someone. So I personally didn't find someone that looked like me as a therapist. And I did not even start going to therapy until I got a little bit older. So not even in the beginnings of my hair loss journey. But mainly because that's not something they offer at all, especially back then. All they talk about is like, get these unreliable treatments, get these injections, do this.
Oh, hell yeah. I call them the magic cures and the shampoos and the whatever else, Western, non-Western.
Yeah. So I don't even think it was like, wasn't even on my parents' radar, I think, to like imagine like, oh, maybe there's someone we can find that can help specifically with navigating this. That was not really the case. They just talk about, do these treatments and that's all we can offer. So
oh, nothing works. So then there's wigs and there's hats and all that stuff, or deciding to go just as you are.
Right. Exactly. And I never fell into any of those categories. Like we did some treatments when I was younger, but I always had like full choice. And like, if I said no more, we did no more, but I never wanted to wear wigs. I never wanted to wear hats. I still don't like to. And so
I think for the people that have seen your recent TikTok with the eyebrows, if you haven't seen it, go check it out. I loved it. It's not only hilarious, but it's also just so vulnerable and authentic and wonderful. So if you're listening to this and you don't know what the hell we're talking about, go check that out because it's really, sorry, side path. But
it's a video of me trying eyebrows for the first time because I've never done that before. And I was like honestly very nervous to do that. And like that video did way beyond what I think right now it's over 5 million views, which is not what I expected from that video. I knew people would be curious to see, but like I didn't know it was going to be like that. But part of the reason I did it was exactly what I was explaining of like, it was hard for me to find people who felt similarly to me. Like, and I love that people find this authenticity and acceptance with wigs and eyebrows and all the things, but I was like, there's other people out there who do feel the same way and they just can't find someone who feel the same way. So maybe it's harder for them to speak up about it. Right. And so that's part of what I try to do on my page. And so trying the eyebrows, I thought it was an interesting contrast of like the typical video you see with people putting on wigs and how it makes them feel better versus that video. It's me putting on eyebrows and feeling worse. And so I thought it was an interesting contrast in a way to help hopefully find some more people. And I think it did find some of the people that felt that way. And that's part of what this work is so important to me, to keep helping people realize that there's help out there. And, you know, I obviously work with people with all sorts of hair loss, not just people who are completely bald, but I think even people knowing that I've been through the kind of all the stages of hair loss and that I've found an acceptance in this kind of the most advanced form, it like helps them instill some sort of confidence that like, oh, she can help me get there no matter like what I choose, like whether it's a wig, whether it's bald. And so that is part of why I do it as well. But it still is difficult to find. So I'm glad the eyebrow video did some help in service of that, of getting it out, the word out there, maybe that, you know, there's so many ways you can look with hair loss that are acceptable. You don't have to choose just one way. We have more options than we think, even though usually the options presented to us are only presented in like, you have to do this, but we don't just have to do that we had to figure out what's best for us.
Exactly. And maybe you start with something and then after a little time, you feel like, oh no, this is not me anymore. Or, you know, I'm leaning towards maybe losing the wig or choosing the wig, whichever works for you, right? Whatever makes you feel best, I think.
Exactly. There's no right or wrong answer, but we certainly need all the options represented so that people know that all of them exist. And one of the things I talked about in one of those videos was that it's one thing to say that you can choose to be bald or choose to wear a wig, but you can't just say it without seeing it. Like if no one sees all those options represented, they won't feel comfortable choosing what they don't see. They're going to go with the option that they see represented because that's going to obviously feel more comfortable, and it doesn't leave enough room for them to navigate what feels true to them, which I think is a big part of the work that we do with our clients, is helping them navigate like what is true to them. In the midst of navigating all the external messages,
all the other stuff. So we're both working in the same field. We have obviously everyone's alopecia experience is different, you know. What do you feel is like the most common themes that you see while coaching women, men, kids, whatever. We just talked about this a little earlier off record. We're both mainly working with women, right? So what are the topics that you see?
A lot of what I see is anxiety and fear based, and like the preoccupation of these anxious thoughts that just like take over the day to day. And that spiral into these internal narratives that just make it so much harder to live your full, like, of the most fulfilling life you can, because these thoughts and these narratives just keep you held back. So a lot of work I do is helping people navigate those narratives. How can we sort of rewire these thought patterns? How can we insert some more self-compassion? I talk a lot about, like, it's not necessarily that we have to make these negative thoughts into positive thoughts, because that doesn't always feel realistic. It's about neutrality, finding self-compassion, being a bit more mindful in the moment, noticing, in the therapy world, we talk about cognitive distortions, which is, I sometimes bring it to my coaching work as well. And it's helping to identify, a distortion, essentially anytime where like reality kind of escapes their thought. Like our brain is always trying to go to like point the finger, find the easiest solution. And it's easy just to go like, oh, hair loss, bad. It means ugly. Like it means all these like black and white sort of thinking patterns. And so like untangling those sort of thinking patterns is a lot of what comes up. Feeling triggered by mirrors, like the body image component, being able, photos, mirrors, that comes up a lot too, of like, how can we look in the mirror, and not necessarily that we have to be like, I'm in love with alopecia, because I always say, like, there's so many misconceptions about acceptance that means like you have to love it and feel great. And that's not the same. And that's so false. It's not what it is at all. Like acceptance is like allowing yourself to feel all the feelings. They're allowed to be negative feelings, but being a non-judgmental observer of those feelings and not shaming yourself for them. So that is a big piece too, of like navigating, like almost dismantling the view of acceptance, because usually people come in thinking that they have to love their hair loss or be happy with it. And we have to navigate like, no, first of all, that's not true. That is not the goal here. It's becoming a non-judgmental observer of these feelings and allowing yourself to have more self-compassion as you go through it. And that's really more of what acceptance is, rather than going like, I love myself and this is great. And I'm so happy this happened to me, because like, that's not realistic. And that's not where healing is going to happen. So yeah, those are kind of some overarching themes that we touch on.
Yeah, I recognize it very much. I also have many women that keep it a secret from their surroundings, so they do wear wigs or hair pieces or toppers or whatever, some sort of alternative hair. Sometimes whole wigs and they're completely bald, the whole spectrum. And their spouse don't know about it. Their kids don't know about it. They cancel vacations and, parties and going out with friends and stuff. So they become so socially isolated that it becomes bigger and heavier, and exactly what you're talking about. Obviously, all the negative thoughts are there, and they're, the less you experience and the less you go out, the bigger those negative thoughts become, obviously.
So when we talk about anxiety, and I talk about this in the therapy world and the coaching world, when you avoid the triggers of anxiety, you think you're making the anxiety less, but you're actually making the anxiety bigger. And that in itself is a lot of the work, right? Like to get less anxiety, you have to do the thing that gives you anxiety, which people are like, what do you mean? But I'm like, that's how I
want to. Yeah.
Yep. And so that's often, I feel like, the hardest part of it is like taking those like very small incremental steps. But that's what it takes, is like doing the small things. And it doesn't have to be, I always talk about like sometimes the first, and I don't know what the coaching lingo is, because I bring over a lot of my therapy lingo, but we call it exposures when we're doing this in terms of anxiety, and like exposing ourselves essentially to the things that give us anxiety. And sometimes I talk about like when it's small steps, like sometimes the first step is just imagining doing it, like not actually even doing anything at all, like just doing an imaginal exposure of it. Sometimes that in itself elicits enough anxiety that we start there. And so I think sometimes the struggle is people come in not knowing where to start. And I think that's sometimes half the battle, is just giving them that first tiny step. Then you build from there.
I also experienced that when people come to me and they've taken that step, they already feel, they're scared, obviously, and they're apprehensive. Oh, are you going to give me scary homework? First of all, coaches usually don't give homework. you give yourself your homework if you want to, but I really see a sense of stress, like, oh my God, I'm sitting here, I'm talking to you, I'm out in the open, I'm doing this, but also a really big sense of relief because they've already taken that step. And I have coaches that come to me, right after the diagnosis because they want to deal with this first thing, they're very proactive, etc. But like I said, I also have many women that have been dealing with this alone for so long that just going to a therapist or a coach, it's like half the work almost, it seems like.
Yeah, no, so I would say that's incredible that you have people that find you immediately after the diagnosis. I feel like that is what
they're usually girls. They're well educated and they're like 20, 25-ish.
Yeah, I think that's one of the struggles we still have here on our side is like upon a diagnosis, they have nowhere to look, that they don't even know that they can even search for that or look for it. So the majority of people I've had are people that have had some form of alopecia, whether it's androgenetic or universalis. So I have the full sort of spectrum as well in terms of wigs, no wigs, hair thinning versus total hair loss. But a majority of them have had it for years and have just like got to a point of like, I just need help. I need to figure out how I can navigate this confidence and acceptance because it's been so many years and I'm still feeling stuck. And now I'm just like tired of feeling stuck. And I want to figure it out.
A point where you're just full done, like or very broke also in my case, because I tried all those things that you could possibly try to help.
It's expensive. And I do a free support group, a peer support group once a month. And that is something that came up in that group last month of like almost feeling guilt and shame of how much money they've spent trying to figure this out. And then realizing that none of the things they tried worked. And now how do they overcome the guilt of all that of like, and part of it is sometimes processing that grief as well, because, you really do have to go through a trial and error process. No one figures it out really on the first try of like what's going to work best, especially because not all the options are given to us. So, it's so valid to be frustrated that it takes so long to find what works, but knowing that you're not alone in terms of everyone goes through that. We all probably have lost a lot of money, lost a lot of sleep in terms of figuring it out, but that's kind of part of it. And it's hard.
I think so too. And I also think that's very much part of the whole acceptance, like grieving. Like you said, you have to also grieve the fact that you try to, grieve or accept, or just come to terms with the fact that it has been your process and your way of navigating whatever the hell is happening to you. And there's so many question marks still, right? In terms of patient's treatment. Obviously, are you going to lose all your hair? Is it going to come back? Will it come back partially? Is it related to stress? Like all that stuff. There's so little answers still.
That's a big, for my clients who don't have universalis or who are maybe in the midst of losing their hair, that's a big thing that comes up all the time of like, what is it going to look like if it falls out more? Like, does that mean I'm going to be ugly? Or like all these like terms that come up when you're working with these people and having to like, again, insert the self-compassion, help them reframe, help find the reality and not get our brains taken away. I always talk about like external and internal narratives. We don't have control over the external narratives at all. We do have control over the internal narrative. And that's what we, try to focus on while also recognizing how shitty and awful these external pieces are. But, controlling what we control and letting go of what we can't is easier said than done, but certainly part of it.
Yeah. And I think once you figure that out or you get a little bit more acquainted and comfortable with that, it'll bring you so much in your life, not only alopecia related. Experience. Yeah. Absolutely. So talking about all the external dialogue and, whatever's happening in the outside world, obviously in our Western culture, hair has been seen for many, many years and still has been and probably will be for at least a few more years as something like an asset of being beautiful, of being healthy, of being young and blah, 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 blah. I have struggled with that as well. And I see that a lot as well with women, trying to come to terms that the way they look in the mirror is not something that we have been taught that is beautiful because when you look at all the dolls we played with, thank God there's some bald Barbies right now. They were not there for a very long time.
No.
So I try to reframe exactly and how do I say this? Try to dismantle what we have been taught that is beautiful and feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Try to see how you can reload that word into something that works for you, you know?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I can imagine that's something you've been doing as well. Yeah.
For sure. And like the key word you said is like what we are taught. And that's what I talk about a lot with my clients. Like if we were taught it, we can unlearn it. It's not something, we don't come out of the womb born knowing that hair loss is bad. We are taught those things because of these billion-dollar industries that want to profit off of insecurities. And it means absolutely nothing. Like, you know, when you really think about it, like what about these strands on our head, the lack of them or the more of them, like what makes that bad or good? Like nothing other than these industries that want to be able to profit off of an insecurity. And so they've decided that no hair is bad. And so that we need to make money off of this now.
Do whatever you can to,
yeah, exactly. So for sure, dismantling that and like creating new ways of valuing beauty that align, creating new definitions of beauty that align with your values is like, I think half a lot of the battle, because beauty is like something we get to define on our own terms. It's not what these industries say it is. And you're allowed to define it in a way that aligns with your own values, not the values of these industries. And so that is absolutely a lot of the work too.
Yeah. I love that you're mentioning values very much. In my coaching, that's pretty much one of the first things I start with, you know, what's important to you when you're an old lady and you look back at your life, you know, what have you been doing that gives you joy? If your best friend will be doing a speech, you know, in front of you and your whole family and friends, what would she say to you? Because that gives you clues about what's actually really important to you. And I feel also outside of the whole alopecia spectrum, many people have kind of lost that, you know, you do what you think you're supposed to do. You know, you find the jobs that you think are good. You know, it's all about those external dialogues, like you're saying, external stories that we internalize. And then you hit a certain age or a certain something happens to you, and alopecia can be one of those things in my experience and what I see happening around me that kind of stop you in your tracks. You're like, wait, what? That was not supposed to happen. Your expectations are completely crumbled, or like, you know, on a sport like smashed out of the rail. How do you say, you know, train on a rail and then it gets off derailed. Thank you. I was doing my best trying to find that word. So you have to kind of, you know, take a second, sit back and reevaluate whatever you thought about yourself, your looks, but also maybe what you're doing in your life.
Yeah, because I always feel like we're swimming in the water of beauty standards. So it's like impossible not to absorb a little bit of it. Like we are existing in it. It's impossible not to absorb some of it, which is.
But also your parents, you know, stuff they can say to you when you're younger, loving you in the most loving way and the best they know how to. But everyone obviously has, you know, been taught a certain something.
And that because they're all swimming in the water too. Our parents were raised that way. Everyone is navigating it, but it's not until something like alopecia where you actually have to like notice it and be like, oh wow, I have to. These messages actually don't serve me, and it's often, you know, our parents or anyone who's never been through any type of sort of physical difference. I always say sometimes to my clients, you know, it's going to be hard because you're going to feel like you're doing all this work to undo these messages and find, you know, what aligns with your values. And you're going to feel like there's going to be a lot of people in your life or most people in your life who are not doing that work. And so it can feel isolating that you're sitting here doing all this to like navigate it and like live a fuller life. And everyone else around you is just fine with it. And because they haven't been impacted in the same way. And that can feel really difficult. Be like, why do I have to do all this work? And they're just, you know, sitting over there not having to think about it at all. So
I also feel like I can imagine that must be so hard, but it's also, I'm sure, so inspiring to people around you. Because I feel like many people are scared to do that work, you know? It is hard work for a reason. You have to dig deep, you confront thought patterns that you didn't even know you have that are not only not serving you, but actually maybe harming you as well. So actually really changing your inner self is very hard work, but I think it's also very inspiring for other people because it gives them a glimpse. Like you said in the beginning, you can be a beacon of light for people that have not been represented the way you're representing yourself. And I feel like when you do the hard work and you actually try to realign, your life and your values with whatever works for you and makes you most comfortable and happy and fulfilled, I think that can be so infectious. Yeah, it can spread, that's what obviously I think we all hope that can happen a little bit.
Yeah, that's definitely our hope. Feeling on the internet it's so hard. Like, I feel like all the negative comments seem to outshadow the positive ones because our brains just work that way. So sometimes even with myself, like, I mean, I practice what I preach 24/7. Like, I do the work of like reframing, realigning with values, doing all that 24/7 to make sure like, oh yeah, this is like, I think people have the perception of, since I'm at this place now where I do have confidence and acceptance, that means every day must be easy and I never have anxiety about it, never feel negatively about it, but that's not the case. I do have all those things, just when those things happen, and now doesn't take a hit to my self-worth. It doesn't decrease my self-esteem like it used to. I'm just able to ride out the wave of like, okay, this is hard, it's difficult, but at the end of the day, I know these are the things that align with me, and I know what the next steps forward are to help me feel like I can be back to my full self again, and not, sit in it and wallow in it. Because the other thing I talk about a lot is like, pain is inevitable, but suffering we have a choice in. So pain is going to happen. Yeah, pain is going to happen no matter what. But if we allow it to turn into suffering, that's where we have a choice, and that's where we're able to, make some changes. So I still experience the pain of it all the time. I just don't allow myself to suffer in it anymore.
Yeah. So what has it been like for you? Do you get a lot of like positive comments? I know because I send you them now and then, but also I'm sure you get a lot of crap.
Yeah,
you're putting yourself out there, you're visible. So obviously the more visible you get, the more good things, but also crappy things you get. Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, I definitely get both. Full spectrum of comments. Just existing bald is triggering to a lot of people because of how hair loss is portrayed. And so that comes with a lot of degrading comments and DMs. But on the other side, like, there's also so many positive DMs. And those are the ones that are like helpful to be like, all right, like, even if people are rude, like, who knows, even for the trolls of the internet, you're still like planting that seed for them, even if it doesn't like in that moment like blossom, like just the exposure of it, like, who knows, maybe decades down the line they'll think back of, or they'll see someone bald walking around, maybe have a second thought at that time. So even the bad comments, I'm like, there's still a bit of good there, that I'm just exposing them to this something that's different than what they look like, which is part of the goal. And then the other side of the comments is always helpful and often what keeps you going on some of the harder days with this work, because it's hard work. But lots of DMs of like people happy that like I wasn't able to find someone who felt similarly, or when I talked about like from the eyebrow video, other people coming forward being like, thank you for sharing this, like I also don't like wearing wigs, or I also don't like that, or like a parent commented like, wow, like my daughter loved watching this because she tried to draw on eyebrows and do her makeup the other day, and she like mentioned she like ran and hid under the table because it like freaked her out to see it, and so she saw this video and like made her feel like at home. And so that's
so important.
So obviously that's like, it's a very niche type of thing, but it's still important that someone is representing it somewhere, or multiple people are. I hope eventually more people feel comfortable to share, because I think that's what creates more empathy. Like when more people show up looking differently, and more people are exposed to people who look different than them, that's how we create nicer humans. I think that's what helped me when I was younger. I gave speeches at my school about alopecia in elementary school, and that helped so much of the kids understanding what it is, and that people look all different ways, and sometimes that's just what we need to make our world a bit kinder. And so even when I get the rude comments, I like am able to remind myself of that, like, it's okay, in the end we're still the goal of helping increase empathy is still happening. So can't win them all, but
no, but it's very yeah, great that you're able to keep holding on to that, and you have this long-term vision, long-term goal. So you'll take a few hits on the way, but
Yeah.
I feel like the way you talk about it, that your self-esteem or your inner confidence or your inner worth, won't be affected by that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, yeah, even talking to you now, I feel like you have this titanium core. I always explain it like that. I do. And there's mushy stuff around it, yeah, that gets hurt a little bit now and then, but your inner self will be untouched.
Yeah, that's sort of how I explain it to clients as well. I'm like, the goal is that we're not going to have bad days. Our goal is just that we're going to make this foundation of self-worth and confidence turn into steel. But right now it's Play-Doh. So like things happen and you can poke holes in it and pieces get pulled off, but we're going to turn it into steel so that when these bad days happen, like, yeah, things can punch it and hit it, but like, it's not going to dent it. It's not going to take things away from it. And that's really what it's about, is like building that foundation so that when you have the bad days, like, yeah, they're hard, but you've like built the tools to manage so that it doesn't take away from knowing that your worth is any different or any less. Yeah, that's what it's all about. And I mean, I talk about it this way now, but I always like to remind people, like, it still took me decades to get there. Like, there's no timeline, there's no magic bullet.
Oh, unfortunately. We'll call people, right, when we find one, but
yeah, that's what I said. Like, when I find the magic wand, I will provide it, but it doesn't exist yet.
No, it's all mindset work, right?
Yeah.
And there's no quick fix for that. We don't have a magic potion or whatever you can take. But is there anything you would want to say to the listeners asking themselves, what the hell do I do first? Like, do you have any, like, throw me a rope, please, help me out? What would you say to them?
Sure. So in the spirit of like this kind of reframing, neutrality, self-compassion work, being non-judgmental with ourselves, one thing that I like to do a lot with clients, and obviously the first step for everyone is going to be different, but if you just need like something quick to like calm your mind or like interject or intervene with this like negative thought pattern next time you see it popping up, one thing I like to do a lot with like mirror work, because a lot of times these like negative things are coming up when we're looking at ourselves in the mirror or in a photo. There's this technique called mirror exposure, to talk about exposure again. And what we do with it is using very neutral language. And when I say neutral, I mean colors, shapes, forms, and functions. That's what I'm going to think of. So like if you're catching yourself, right, if you're catching like, oh, I look so bad, I'm ugly, no one will like me this way, I say look at the mirror and look at what you're seeing, not what you think you see. So like, obviously we're on Zoom, I see my head right now. Like if I was looking in a mirror, I might say, okay, I see a tan oval, like 4 inches down from the top of the oval, I see 2 almond shapes, the brown circle in the middle, and like those almonds help me see the world. So like, so neutral, you're taking all judgment and shame off the table, and you're just redirecting your brain to something that can't have any judgment in it. And your brain likely will go back to that negative thinking probably soon after, because that's how it's wired. But a lot of these processes take repetition and time, and often sometimes working with someone to help you get there. But yeah, if you catch yourself in the mirror or in a photo next time, being really mean to yourself, try a little bit of that. Try to insert some very neutral, non-judgmental language of what you see, not what you think you're seeing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think many people, and it's something that you can do comfortably at home, right? So it's a nice first step. I think many people will be very helped with that. Yeah. That makes me think of a question. In therapy, I'm a social psychologist as well and a coach. So I am very used to and have been working in this field for 20 plus years. So I am very aware of my thoughts, of my feelings and all that. But obviously, because it's what I've been doing for so long, I'm sure you have the same. But I also encounter many people that, are not at all used to dissecting what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And it's just like one big blob. That they first have to take time to get to know themselves that way and get to know their thoughts and actually be able to take a step back and observe their thoughts and stuff. Do you have any advice for people that are trying to figure that out?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I do with all my clients is awareness work. Sometimes I say, write it all out, like take time out of your day, or as the day goes on, to just be more cognizant of when this is coming up. and write it elsewhere. Like when it's all stuck in our head, it gets very jumbled up. You can't really see it clearly. You can't figure out how to proceed clearly either. And sometimes we need to get it outside of our head first so we can see it better, which is why I created the journals I have, because I think things like journaling are really important. And so getting it outside your head so you can see it clearly. I always describe journaling as like everything in your head is a jumbled up knot, and journaling helps untangle the knot. And if it's untangled, you can see it and proceed more clearly, versus in your head, you can't. So if you're working on the just initial like building awareness, definitely do some work with journaling. Write out all the thoughts exactly as they are in your head on a sheet of paper. Get it all out elsewhere. Be able to see it from a different perspective too is also just helpful, and helps us also identify, usually the step after awareness of my client is seeing what those thoughts are and noticing any of the distortions in there that I mentioned earlier. And once we can see that, like that's when we can start the sort of skill building process afterwards of how can we now reframe all that and rewire our brain in a different way.
Yeah, same. I always call it like first you have to know what the buttons are before you can try to push and like retune them and like turn them, because when you don't know what you're looking for and how to find it, then you can skill build all you want, but you won't be able to have any control and any grip on whatever's happening in your head. Yeah. Thank you, Alison. It's been so nice talking to you. And I'm so happy that you were able to come on the show. I am very much in awe of what you're doing. When I decided to take this path as well and actually expose myself as a woman with alopecia and actually, building my work life around this, you were one of the first people that I looked at. And I think it's incredible what you're doing. You also have a very fun and educational and interesting YouTube channel I just wanted to mention in case people don't know that yet. You started that in college, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, I should probably be better at it. I haven't posted on there in a while, but that was what I started with. Yeah, I started with YouTube in high school, actually, but I was like very nervous then, and I didn't really start it back up again until I got to college, and I felt a little bit more confident and I was less scared of being bullied. But yeah, that was kind of the beginnings of it all, was on that channel.
Yeah.
So if you want to see like the younger version of me and how this all started, it's probably I don't think I could rewatch them myself. It's probably so embarrassing, those but if you want to see like the very beginnings of it, like, yeah, feel free.
And also follow you on Instagram, obviously. You mentioned you also coach internationally, right? And through Zoom and online. Yes. I always say to my clients, it's so important to find a coach that you click with, And if it's not me, then I would very much encourage everyone that's listening to go check you out, because if you just need help, you want to talk to someone, it's like evident that you have to find someone that you feel comfortable with.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, coaching wise, worldwide, if you're looking for a therapist, I can only work with people who are located in New York. Both I do telehealth virtually. And yeah, you're right. The finding a right fit is so important, which is why I'm happy to see like there is like an uptake, it seems, and like more people doing coaching sort of things for hair loss, because the more options, the better off everyone is. But yeah, so worldwide for coaching, New York for therapy. And then I have a free support group that's just peer support, not professional support, that meets once a month. If you're interested in just that, you need to like dip your toe wet before you like get any sort of professional support. And then my journals as well. If you're like not even open to meeting people yet and you just like want to do some work on yourself, I have the hair loss diary, and the authentically you journal, and the perfectly imperfect journal. There's 3 journal options, depending on if you want something hair loss specific or something more general. And I have a quiz on my website that can help match you with a journal. So kind of the full range of like, if you're ready to do professional support or not any type of meeting anyone with alopecia, because I know in the beginning for me, that was, I didn't even want community support. I didn't want to talk to anyone with alopecia. So not everyone's that. So I try to have like a full spectrum of like meeting people where they're at. So yeah, all that is certainly on my website.
And I think it's also very good to mention that you have your education, yes. You're actually a licensed coach, because coaches in Holland, everyone can call themselves a coach. And
well, honestly, the same here. I think anyone can. But yeah, I went to school. I have my master's. I have.
I do think for me that would, if I'm looking for a coach, I want that to be in order. So for me, I always say, go with whoever feels right for you, but do try to see if they have the actual they did the courses, they did the work.
For sure. Yeah. You certainly want someone. I think with hair loss, it's so important to understand the mental health side, especially that's what you're, depends what you're looking for. But I think a lot with people with hair loss, they're looking for like that mental health component, and that's what's hard to find. So certainly, look out for credentials and making sure people are
because
aligned.
it touches on so many layers, right? Like you said, maybe if you just want some practical advice on eyebrows or whatever, but mostly people are actually stuck, on different things in their life. Yeah.
Really.
Thank you, Alison.
Of course, thank you.
Dank voor het luisteren. Te gek dat je er was. Als je meer wil weten over mij en wat ik te bieden heb als de Alopecia coach, schroom dan niet om mij een mailtje te sturen naar evelien@alopeciacoach.com of kijk op mijn website. Ik hoop snel van je te horen. You got this. Doei!